This episode of the Sailing Podcast has been made possible by our sponsor, His Majesty's Coast Guard.
We've got a ship coming towards us, a little boat. Well, we didn't know it was little. We knew it was called the MV Poodoo. I get a call from someone saying it can only make 5 knots into the sea state, and this is in the inland waterway. It's coming from Punta Arenas down the inland waterway, and can only do 5 knots. That was the first clue that this wasn't going to be the answer to all our prayers. Yeah. Sure enough, this little thing turns out with a tyre on the board. Little tugboat. Yeah. Well, I think it was even. Well, I don't think it was even that. I think it was a fishing boat with a tyre on the front. Yeah. And by now it's dark. The wind's gusting 60 knots, just continuously. What I had hoped was that they would at least take a line and yank the ship's head into wind and stop this roll. It was the roll that was still killing us. And we're now sitting so low in the water. We've now got nearly 2,000 tons of water on board. We're sitting so low that when it rolls, waves are breaking over the back end, the transom. And the hatch into the aft provision hold is not watertight.
Welcome to the Sailing Podcast with me, Theo Stocker, and I am fortunate to be joined today by Tom Sharpe. Tom, thanks for coming along.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Tom, we've got an amazing story to go into today. I know that you've rehearsed it a few times before. You are Commander, Royal Navy, retired, and you've commanded a number of Her Majesty's warships over your career, and now you run a communications consultancy, is that right?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing now and what the sort of the communications that you're consulting on. What sort of thing is that?
Well, Special Project Partners focuses on the complex and contested, by which I mean companies, whether they're private, public, large, small, government-owned, quasi-government, foreign, or in the UK, it doesn't matter. At their heart, they have a situation that needs either resolving or they need to be protected from in the future. So it's not PR, I suppose, is perhaps a snappier way of putting it. We do all the other levers of communication. We can do PR, and sometimes that's part of it. But a lot of the time it's much more focused than that, whether it's government relations, but it all sits at the sort of strategic level. So that's what we specialise in. Like I say, both here and we've got an office here and an office in the Middle East, and it's never dull.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty to manage and consult on at the moment. And when did you leave the Royal Navy?
I left in 2017. Yeah. I joined in 1990, so that was 27 years. So I gave it a go.
Yes, yeah, that's a fair stint.
But ultimately, I figured I could probably earn more while spending a lot more time at home, and that was the metric that eventually led me to leave. I had a fantastic time.
I think that's almost guaranteed with seafaring of any sort, isn't it?
I was just away all the time, and I could see more and more of it. Even perhaps not at sea anymore. I'd sort of perhaps topped out there, but I was just going to be away a lot, and eventually the novelty had worn off.
Yes, yeah. You'd been given some pretty cool toys to play with in your career. Yeah. So what ships did you command?
Yeah, and in that regard I was very lucky. I got an early show of command, age 28. It was a fishery protection boat. There's a toast in the Navy called a bloody war in a sickly season, because back in the day that was the only way you could get promoted. And tragically, someone else in the squadron committed suicide, and this created a reshuffle. I moved up in the bed within my ship, which I'd been in as the second in command for a year already, HMS Lindisfarne. So we were offshore patrol vessels, as we called them then, quite deep-hulled, converted fishing vessels. By deep-hull, I mean close to 6 meters. Yeah. Single.
Well, that is deep.
Yeah, it is for a small ship. We were 1,200 tons, so just 60 meters long, pretty stubby. Yeah. You didn't want to be heading into the sea.
So that's Castle class.
No, Island class.
Island class.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And we were Lindisfarne, so always the slightly poor relationship when Shetland and Guernsey and Jersey all had these fantastic visits to go to. We had a monastery which you couldn't get anywhere near without running aground, sadly.
Yeah, a small muddy bay, and that's about
so we would berth in North Shields and go from there. But it was fantastic. In pure, as a junior command, and I was given an acting promotion to lieutenant commander 1,200 tons, 37 people, all of whom were pretty old, pretty senior. They knew what they were doing. In fact, at one point I was the second youngest person on board. And it was fantastic. So all I really had to do was kind of just draw in this expertise around me. And I'd spent a year shaping that as the second in command anyway.
Yeah.
And we would spend our days, you would turn out of Portsmouth and either go left or right, depending on which sector you'd been assigned to. The preference was to go right and go on to West Patrol, greater variety of fish, better runs ashore if you catch someone up to no good by the time you get up to Liverpool, etc. And we would board fishing vessels day and night, ideally by surprise. If you couldn't genuinely jump on board without announcing it, you did have to call them up on the VHF and say, declare your intention to board.
Yeah.
But you could do that sort of as you were vaulting there.
While you're alongside.
And it involved putting the rib away. We would put our rib away, 5-meter ribs, a little 140 horsepower at the back, I think it was. No,
so
less than that.
The little Avon Sea
Rider.
Yeah,
little Avon Sea Rider, 90 horsepower at the back.
Great boat. Yeah.
Particularly, I mean, we would focus very hard on downsea transits. So you would position the ship, sometimes going 30 miles round. If you wanted to do an out-of-sight boarding, i.e. the ship is invisible to the fishing vessel you're going to board, then that could involve being 12 to 15 miles away. You don't want to be doing that in an Avon into sea in the Irish Sea in February.
Yeah,
that gets very tedious very quickly. And I mean, the number of times you would go away in the rib and in the troughs, the ship would be out of sight. So it's pretty gnarly. And then of course you get to the fishing boat, and if they've seen you coming, quite often they don't want you on board. So they'll do whatever they can with all sorts of stuff.
They don't want you to see what they've been catching.
Correct.
And what size their nets are.
Correct. The net tricks, they have a thing where they can actually, they have a cod end within the cod end, and it's all laced up to the top of and they cut, it's called a blinder, and they cut that, and the whole thing unravels, and then when you make them haul their nets and they ditch their catch, inside it is another cod end, another net.
Yeah.
So of course, when the two are together, there's no mesh size, and the fish can't escape. So look, if there's a trick to defeat us, then they would do it. And our job was to get on board and try and identify what was going on. And of course, if they are up to no good, particularly if they were a foreign boat, then you would take them in and take them to court.
Yeah.
They could be fined. They could have their catch confiscated. They could have their nets impounded. So it was a very interesting interface between sort of raw, kind of quite tricky seamanship, but also a lot of politics. By the time you got into what was MAF at the time, now DEFRA,
yes,
you're playing big boys politics, and you don't always have sight of what's going on.
Because you're just dealing with a fishing vessel at a time.
Exactly right.
But it's international relationships between fishing communities and governments that you're actually enacting.
And we know how sensitive that can get.
Yes.
So you had to have good relationships essentially with the team in town. In Whitehall. Meanwhile, because if there's a fleet of 15 boats, as soon as you boarded one, they would all haul their nets and all rectify whatever it is, fill in their logbooks. You could almost see them doing it. So you got that first hit, and so that involved these huge long-range boardings, quite often at night, so that you could jump on at first light. That was brilliant.
So it's relatively small vessels, particularly when it comes to a 4.5 meter rib. That's really exposed doing that out at sea in rough conditions. That's proper sort of.
Yeah, it was pretty intense, and if you get it wrong in an instant, particularly bringing the boat back in alongside. Now we had huge stabilizers, so we were deep hulled and stubby nosed, so hopeless going into sea, but beam on with these big stabilizers. We were actually quite stable, so you could create a big slick as the boat came in. Literally kind of almost flatten the water, and as long as the boat and the timings are right, the boat could come in, hook on, and out of the water before the beam went through the swell went through the stern or anything like that. And of course we were slick because it's all we did.
Yes.
Day in, day out, all weathers, all year round. So our boat handling, ship handling, boat driving, some of the coxswains driving these things into these fishing boats were amongst the most skilled I ever saw in the Navy. In fact, they were.
Yeah.
And it was a privilege for them to do it. If they got it wrong, they could have their ticket taken off them. So it was very competitive and thoroughly rewarding, because ultimately you know, if we weren't protecting those fisheries, then they could be run dry very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So that was a great introduction to small ship commands. And then I was lucky because I then went on to what should have been my sort of command appointment, which was in one of the Northern Ireland patrol vessels. So this was a converted mine hunter. All the mine sweeping gear had been taken off, and we had 4 boats on the back of that. A bunch of Royal Marines, an Army dog handler, and we were based up in Faslane on the west coast of Scotland, and we would go to Belfast to pick up the Marines and the dogs and the bigger boats, and then we would patrol, you know, Northern Ireland. We spent a lot of time in Carlingford Lough down on the border there, southern border, boarding the ferry. So again, we're back into, and those ferries would leave Warren Point on the border there, and they didn't wait around. They were doing 16 knots quite often by the time you got alongside them to jump on board. So again, at night, in the weather there, you had to be pretty slick.
Yeah.
And now this was Royal Marine landing craft ratings driving the boats, who were very, very capable. So yes, again, another kind of small ship, and this was 60 meters, but much lighter, 3-meter draft. So we only displaced 600 tons.
Yeah.
Very round hull for mine clearance purposes, so you can hover and defuse mines, detect and defuse mines. So really, as a seakeeper, pretty hopeless. We bobbed around like a cork. And certainly in terms of ship handling, it was a lot of windage, very slab-sided. So anything more than about 8 knots of wind, and you were going sideways as you approached the berth. So again, as a sort of junior command, a real opportunity to learn all that stuff and do it every single day in difficult conditions.
Yeah. And what were the boardings for there? What were you patrolling for there?
Predominantly, so the Omar bomb came from Warren Point to Heysham on that ferry. The explosives that became that bomb travelled that route because Warren Point was on the border. It was full of smuggling, and so our job was really to bung up that route and make sure that couldn't happen again. Hence the sniffer dog. Yeah. Which I never got used to. Incidentally, hearing a dog barking at sea, you'd be like, "Oh, what was that?" But that was
rather Second World War dog ship's mascot.
It was, and actually, of the 17 or 20 dogs or whatever it was they had in the province, I think there were only about 4 that were seaworthy. Yeah. They let you know pretty quickly if they weren't happy. Yeah. In fact, they just became ineffective.
I think that's the first time I've heard of a Royal Navy ship where the main weapon system on board is a dog.
It was extraordinary, and these dogs were incredible, really. I mean, their food allowance per day was higher than that of my sailors. This was a piece of information we found out by mistake and then had to keep quiet from the ship's company. But yes, this dog was extraordinary, and if you went up the Belfast ferry, let's say, that was a 60-foot pilot ladder. It was very important to be up that ladder and before the dog was pulled up. Hand over hand with a harness and a rope, because 60 foot's a long way for the dog to do its business when you're in the boat underneath it. So get out first, get up the ladder, get the dog on. So we would board a lot of fishing boats, sort of low-level intelligence gathering in and out of the ports and harbours there, because fishing communities are a hotbed of discussions and gossip. Yeah.
And smuggling, presumably.
And smuggling, right? And
as they have been down the centuries.
It was exactly. And what was fascinating was, because of my previous job had been in fishery protection, that's they're nervous when you board them that you're going to take their catch. So I would talk the language of fishery protection, and by the time when I then revealed I wasn't fishery protection, I didn't care about their catch, they would sing like a canary. I would get all sorts of really interesting local information, what was going on in their town, and etc. And then that just all goes into a giant melting pot, gets fed back into Belfast, and they do with it what they will. But you know, it was pretty punchy, and we would occasionally take people ashore, you know, soldiers with longer hair and specialist skills, and pick them up again later in the night. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff going on. It was really interesting, and kind of politically, again, very, very sensitive. You know, we were mandated by sort of PM directive to be on task 365 days a year, one of our ships. So it was busy, you know, and important.
And then before we come on to your final command, there was one more, a frigate in there, I think.
No, the frigate actually was after the icebreaker.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so the icebreaker was again slightly early out of turn. I had started as XO and was in temporary command when the incident happened.
Yeah.
And then in the fullness of time, I had been already assigned to go and command a frigate before I joined the icebreaker. So that then happened.
Okay.
Anyway.
And the frigate, and we'll come back onto the icebreaker, but the frigate was HMS Somerset?
Sorry, HMS St Albans. Somerset was the one that I did prior to that. No, HMS St Albans, which at the time, well, not at the time, still is our newest Type 23 frigate, although new is a relative term these days. And I was lucky, I had 2 years. It was a running ship, so there was no refit to come out of or to go into. We were a running ship, and we spent most of the first year working up and then in the Gulf. Mm-hmm. Which was fascinating. So
that was the first Iraq War?
No, sometime after that actually.
Right.
Sometime after that, and but Iran, constantly sort of spinning up. There was always a sense that they were about to buy a Russian surface-to-air missile system that would mean that their nuclear facilities became out of reach for the Israelis. So the strike was going to happen. I mean, all these things that have now played out.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
In a way that the intelligence community perhaps didn't quite foresee, but nevertheless, every time we went there was a possibility that Iran were going to spin up, and they would threaten us, and they would rush us in, fast attack craft, 40 at a time, and test our reactions and all this sort of stuff. But because we had a towed array sonar, so a sonar that you can vary the depth of, which is important when it comes to hunting submarines, and a Merlin helicopter, which is the Navy's specialist anti-submarine helicopter.
Yeah.
We became very valuable to the US carrier strike groups that were there. It was the Bush first and then the Stennis, because we had something that they didn't in this anti-submarine hunting thing, which is when you're working with the Americans, that's a nice place to be. If you've got kit that's better than what they have, you're in the gang.
And that doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't happen very often, no. And we had it, so we were the ASW commander, anti-submarine warfare commander for 2 consecutive carrier strike groups, which was great. Playing with the Americans and revving up for if this genuinely spun up. So that was the first year, and then the second year, we put all that anti-submarine work to good use because we then became what's called the towed array patrol ship, the TAPS ship. Yeah. You're the on-call frigate to go north, sometimes a long way north, and hunt Russian submarines. Hunt, detect, deter, ultimately, I suppose, defeat, but mainly to deter what they call out-of-area deployers. So the Russian nuclear-powered attack submarines. That again, and we're seeing this a lot more now. They're around the UK more. They're interfering with our critical undersea infrastructure. It's caught the imagination. Back in 2011, 2012, no one cared. We were very much
the Cold War was over.
Peace dividend.
Yeah,
peace dividend. No one cares. But from a professional perspective, from an anti-submarine perspective, it was pretty hardcore. From managing the ship's company was difficult because you were constantly on call, waiting for the call from northward, and then you would go to Faz Lane and it would false alarm, reset, and it's very, very disruptive. But when you went north into the high north and found what it was you were looking for, that was pretty exciting.
Fairly high-tech fishing.
Yeah, it really was. It really was, and of course, they don't want to be caught either.
No.
It's they're not. It's just like the fishing boats. They don't want to be caught, so they're proactively doing things to make them hard to detect. Of course, it's not just us v them. It's never one ship versus one submarine. If it is, you're going to come unstuck. There's a whole spider's web of kit and equipment, from satellites to aircraft to other submarines. It's like I say, a giant kind of net, and you're just one part of it, but an important part, because we need to keep those things off our pipelines, off our energy, off our financial transactions. We need to keep them away from our own nuclear deterrent. That's critical.
Yeah.
So, my frigate command was like I say, 2 very different years, but both frontline, both sort of forward operating, and both in interesting environmental conditions.
Yeah, and very different threats.
Very different. Yeah.
Good. So that brings us then, we'll skip back a little bit and we'll go to HMS Endurance, which is what we're really here to talk about. I'm sure we could probably talk all afternoon about. ships and the sea. And obviously this is a sailing podcast, and we are talking almost exclusively about the Navy and naval ships and things. But the real interest is that once you're at sea, seamanship is seamanship. The vessels might be different, but a lot of the processes and the thought processes have some transferable elements.
Yeah.
There's lots that sailors can learn from big ship handlers in the same way that they could probably learn something from the sort of the slightly more informal skills of the sailor. But also it's just an incredible story of survival, leadership, resilience in a fairly challenging situation. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about HMS Endurance and what her role is? She was the Navy's only icebreaker. We've always had an Endurance, or actually not always, but of course Endurance became famous and synonymous with the Falklands campaign, with the withdrawal of the previous Endurance, signalling to the Argentinians that we were no longer serious about defending the Falklands, and the rest is history. Prior to that, I think in the 60s there was HMS Protector, but we've always had a presence down there, partly because of the Falklands, but partly because of the Antarctic Treaty and the way that the slices of the pie overlap around Antarctica, and we have one of those slices of pie, and it overlaps with the Argentinians and the Chileans over the peninsula. So Endurance was taken up from trade in 1990 as a continuation of this. The previous one of Falklands fame was now knackered. We needed a new icebreaker. Foreign Office agreed, and we took this ship up from trade, and then over the next couple of years sort of wrestled with them, the finances, and eventually bought it. Bought it and fully navalized it. Now this is an interesting point, because from that moment on we started to engender some of the conditions that eventually led to the incident. Yeah.
I'll talk about causes perhaps a bit later, but we, the Navy does not do well with commercial vessels. We think differently. To your point just now about small ships versus big ships, there's a different mindset. Yacht is different from a super yacht, and rightly or wrongly, the Navy has a way of running ships, and it's not necessarily compatible with ships taken up from trade. Much heavier machinery, much lighter crew, much lighter. Polar Circle was supposed to run with a crew of 35. We had 100 people on before you could go, what are they all for? We just sort of swamped it with people, Marines, hydrographers, and so on.
And that doesn't make it easier to run the vessel. That actually just overloads the vessel and
Correct.
all the systems on board.
Correct. You're satisfying the need to have all these little pockets of activity, whether that's scientists who need Marines to go ashore, whether it's an entire hydrographic team because we became a pretty capable survey vessel. So you're ticking all those boxes. And also the sense that, almost what is our sort of resilience if we came under fire again? More people is a very naval answer to that, and rightly so. On the other hand, you're totally stressing the entire thing. The hotel systems and services in that ship are designed for X number of people, and you've trebled that.
So that's generators, water systems, wastewater, food, catering, all of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was definitely a factor in what happened next that built up over many years. And she was designed to run from Norway to the Arctic. That was really her operating route. So comparatively benign.
Quite a short stretch.
Short stretch, and what you imagine that the conditions in the Arctic are pretty harsh, and they are, but the Antarctic's worse. And to get there, you've got to go through the tropics, and we weren't air conditioned.
Yeah.
So again, taking the ship out of its operating parameters and using it a different way, and rinse and repeat for many years. This is from 1990 onwards. So, but our role, we had 3 taskmasters effectively. The Foreign Office was number 1. So they had an interest in the ship. It's why it had a white ensign, not a blue ensign or someone else operating it. It's a white ensign because they wanted the Navy down there doing Navy stuff.
Yeah.
Happy days. And we would inspect the various bases in Antarctica to make sure they're complying with the requirements of the Antarctic Treaty. So that was task 1. Task 2 was the UK Hydrographic Office. The chart makers in Taunton, who I'm sure your listeners will know well. I mean, there's an awful lot of uncharted water down there.
Yeah.
as you'd expect. There's an increasing amount of cruise line activity,
Yes.
who all navigate on the "I've been here before" method of navigation, which down there is dangerous because the topography of the place is so aggressive.
Yeah, you can be 10 yards
Correct.
to one side.
You piled into that bay last year. Now you're 10 yards to the east, and you're on a pinnacle. And ships have come a cropper down there doing that. And so we had a multi-beam echo sounder. We had survey boats. We could send these things away to chart and provide that kind of information, which was, from a ship handling perspective, actually could get really quite lively, particularly if the ship itself becomes the main sort of source of this charting. You're taking a large red lump into some quite tight areas.
Yes.
That
and
are
by definition
uncharted.
Yeah.
A white piece of paper, which is disconcerting these days.
Yes.
Looking at that going.
Yeah.
So you would sort of, it was almost like mowing the grass. You'd go in sideways with your multi-beam echo sounder, and you'd get a coloured swath on the display. And you kept a very close eye on that. But then on the way back, as long as you were inside the coloured bit, you knew you were safe because you just swept it. So you would sort of feel your way in. So that was Taskmaster number 2. And number 3 was the British Antarctic Survey, based in Cambridge. They had their own ships. Obviously, they got the Sir Richard Attenborough now. But none of their ships had helicopters, whereas we had 2.
Yeah.
So we could take the British Antarctic Survey scientists into nooks and crannies that they couldn't get to do. I mean, the list of tasks they did actually was extraordinary, but the one that sticks in mind was digging out ice cores with 10,000-year-old oxygen trapped in the ice, bring it back on board, put it in the freezers, take it back to Cambridge for analysis at a later date. But there was an awful lot of work going on, and that sometimes involved putting the scientists ashore for quite a few days at a time, which is just, it is hard to describe how difficult it is to work down there.
Yeah.
Periodically the sun comes out, a bit like today, and everyone runs out with their camera and takes these just extraordinary pictures.
Yeah.
And then what that doesn't show is that an hour later you're getting absolutely battered.
Because you're deep down in the sort of the roaring 40s and furious 50s.
Right, and crossing Drake's Passage. I mean, it is the roughest stretch of ocean in the world, in my view, bar none. It just goes round and round and round.
And then it narrows between the Antarctic Peninsula and Cape Horn.
Exactly right. Yeah. You can see it, and then you get the shallows, and it's savage. Funnily enough, when you get to the peninsula into the ice, it calms down. The ice has a calming effect on the sea state.
And you're also then a bit of shelter.
And you can find shelter, right? But that crossing. And Endurance was not a particularly elegant ship. She didn't cut through the waves. She used to barge past them.
Yeah.
Quite a high centre of gravity, and we had a roll reduction tank fitted sort of high up, which was 7 tons of water.
Yeah.
To try and sort of soften the ship a bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is where sailing boats have a little bit of an advantage because they've got a big lump of lead hanging a long way down underneath them. Yeah. And then actually you don't realise until you've been dismasted, but having a mast is exactly that. It slows the metronome down and it stops you bouncing backwards and forwards.
Exactly, and that's exactly why we had this roll reduction tank fitted, because the ship wasn't supposed to go in those sorts of sea states. So this was, and you can have retractable stabilizers, but that starts getting quite expensive. And it wasn't designed with our ship. So again, if you're going into the ice, you can't have stabilizers. So this roll reduction tank was the solution. But I mean, there were definitely moments crossing that Drake's Passage where it was pretty uncomfortable.
And all of this plays into the incident, including the roll reduction tank.
Yeah.
Let's move on a little bit then. So Endurance was down into the ice, and then rather than slogging down to the ice for 9 months, coming home for the Antarctic winter and then going back again, that's a transit of what, 10,000, 8,000, 10,000 miles?
10,000 miles, yeah.
Yeah,
plus or minus,
the powers that be decided that you would do 18 months down there, and then people would come home for a little bit of R&R and then go back out to the ship.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We were trying to get more value for money out of the whole fleet, actually. And one of the solutions was the Endurance model, which was incredibly inefficient, as you describe. So rather than coming back to the UK, we'll go to Simonstown in the austral winter. So when it ices over in Antarctica, you really can't go anywhere near it at that point. So we would go to South Africa. We would be refitted there, or rather touched up. It was a paint job, not a refit. Part of the problem. And then we would do a work period up West Africa, off Nigeria. We went to Ghana, we went to Sierra Leone, did some really fascinating work. Lots of climate change seminars, which was, kind of impactful. If you're there in an icebreaker, you've got scientists on board who are measuring this stuff. You're in a country, let's say Ghana, where they're feeling it inland with the deforestation really hard. So it was very effective, but again, no air conditioning. So the ship was melting, we were melting.
Yeah.
The ship was melting, the wiring was melting. Again, just taking it away from how it was supposed to be operated. But an interesting trip. And then we went back down to the Falklands as the ice started to thaw. We did a period in Antarctica, a work period in Antarctica, with a new captain at this point. The captain had changed at very short notice, new captain. But the plan was, because we were away for 18 months, the plan was always for me to have a work period in command. I'd passed for my frigate command, that was in the bag, in theory, and I would take a work period, not in Antarctica. The Foreign Office wouldn't allow that. They needed a foreign captain down there.
Yeah.
But I could do South Georgia. So fine, so that was the plan. It was about, I think, an 8-week work period in total. I would take the ship from the Falklands, captain would go home, and we were constantly rotating about a third of the crew anyway, just to manage time at home. We would rotate the crew in the Falklands. We did a little workup with our sea training, our flag officer sea training team would come and give us a sort of an assessment, which went quite badly actually, for reasons that will become clear. And then we would sail and go to South Georgia and then do all the work that I've just described, but off South Georgia. Yeah. And it was at the end of that, again, even that wasn't tidy. We were supposed to go from South Georgia up to Valparaiso.
Which is on the west coast of Chile.
Northwest Chile. And we were going to go through the Magellan Straits for obvious reasons to avoid the Drake's Passage and the thing we've just described. But the Argentinians at the last minute said, no, we won't allow that. And then they said to the Chileans, actually, we don't want you taking her alongside unless they've been via somewhere neutral, which is an extraordinary thing to say. But the net result of that was we had to pack up.
So sort of making life awkward.
Yeah,
for you.
Being difficult.
Yeah.
And annoying that the Chileans went with it.
Yeah.
That they said, no, don't be silly. Anyway, the net result was we had to pack up early from South Georgia and do a dogleg across Drake's Passage to get to Antarctica to reset.
Okay.
Whatever that means. I tell you what it means in real life. For 10 days, we couldn't put anything down. It was like being in a yacht.
Yeah.
Just
rolling and being thrown around.
Exactly. So everything was clamped down. Eating, walking around was all tricky. I know I'm not going to get any sympathy from the yacht community on this one, but 10 days was pretty tiring. And as part of this, we were struggling to make fresh water for the number of people we had on board. Yeah. But also because of the fragility of the plant in this sea state. So we went around Cape Horn that morning. And went into Magellan. We still needed to fly the helicopters, so we went into the western Magellan Strait to launch the helicopters, and that's where it happened.
And what did happen?
Yeah, I mean the short story is the engineers went to work on a seawater inlet strainer. That was deemed to be the culprit for our inability to produce fresh water. Yeah. They took the strainer and
so that's the bit that stops rubbish getting sucked
exactly
up
right.
That goes into the water.
One of about 4 different systems that come into the ship.
Yeah.
And they were working on one of them. I mean, interestingly, the wrong one for what they thought they were going to do. So the engineer didn't know where they were working. Anyway, maybe we'll come back to that. But the point is they essentially left the ship in a condition where there was only one valve keeping the water out. Yeah. And that wasn't a fail-safe valve. It was a butterfly valve that needed a continuous supply of LP air to keep it shut. They denied it that LP air supply. The valve failed. So the actuator essentially above it went into balance. The valve failed, and so it then couldn't be shut. And the next thing that happens is we take on 1,200 tons of water in half an hour.
So they've effectively, you've got a hole through the bottom, a through hole in the bottom of the boat. Yeah. What sort of size are we talking?
The sea chest is 4 foot by 4 foot.
Okay.
The valve inlet is probably 2.5 feet. The actual valve through which the water is now exiting probably 18 inches.
So that's a significant
at a depth
size
of 8 meters.
hole.
Yeah.
Because when you do your sort of damage control training and things, you're training for sort of things that you can shove wooden wedges into and that sort of thing.
Right.
But
Yeah, no, that's not happening.
You
here.
don't carry many
No.
softwood plugs that are 2.5 foot big.
No, I mean so when it went, I had just left the cabin. Like I say, in my cabin, I had just left the bridge. We'd been flying all day, both helicopters, shuttling backwards and forwards to Punta Arenas, dropping the people off. Had we stuck with plan A, we would have gone past Punta Arenas and dropped them off by boat or something easy. So we were concocting a plan on the hoof to do it by helicopters, which meant that we'd been there all day. The engineer had put a rocket up the other engineers to say we need to improve freshwater production, or we're going to go through to the Falklands for Christmas. That was the sort of threat of the day.
Okay.
Not particularly subtle. So they've run off to do this work. They emailed the person whose system it was. He was ashore as one of the sort of rotations.
Yeah.
They emailed him to say, do you recommend this?
Sorry, just to say we've got a red funnel
there
coming in, so if that's distracting.
Flashbacks.
Yeah. We're actually in Navico's offices here in Southampton on the town quay. Thanks to Navico for letting us use the office. That's B&G and Simrad and all of that stuff. So they very kindly let us use the space. So now we've got a ship, appropriately a red and white ship.
Red and white ship, and
I've laid this on just
about as elegant as Endurance was, actually. Yeah, I would.
And almost as top heavy.
Probably, yeah. No, so we so the work was taking place, and I'd gone down to my cabin just for a cup of tea when the first pipe was casualty in the engine room. That was the main broadcast pipe, which is that's bad, right? You go, okay, casualty's bad, but in the engine room, your immediate thought is, okay, what's happened here? And then followed by flood in the engine room. So I hear flood in the engine room, casualty, then flood. This is not good. So I sort of head up to the bridge, and there's a D in the middle of the Endurance bridge where the captain's chair is and a few other controls and a bank of TVs, and there is the TV into the engine room.
Yeah.
I remember looking at that, going, my immediate thought, if we don't fix that, if we don't stop that, we're going to sink. Because I didn't know it at the time, but we were 1,200 tons of water in half an hour. So this thing was coming in like nothing I've ever seen.
I think it was like 600. I did work it out as how many litres a second it was, but
I haven't done that, but yeah.
I think it was either 60 or 600. I'll do the maths afterwards. I'll put it on the video, but
it was loud enough. It was loud enough to drown out the noise of the main engines that were just there. So there were sailors in there already. The flood in the engine room had got the attack team in there. Two of them not in suits, two of them in suits with a bag of wedges and a lot of hope.
Yeah.
And trying to get to but they couldn't get anywhere near it because
the force of what depth is this through?
8 meters.
So you've got a huge amount of hydrostatic pressure there. It's an absolute torrent. It's like a 2.5 foot wide fire hydrant in your face.
Yeah. And they did subsequently come in with mattresses to try and, if you can get anything on these things, you can maybe, but they couldn't get anywhere near just getting. And I could see the sailors in the engine room. The water was up to their shins, and I knew that there's a huge amount of deck below the plates they're on that's now already full. So first thought, if we don't stop this, we're going to sink. That was my immediate sort of thought. I turned to my right, and to starboard is the damage control team, and they've already closed up. And it was very interesting because, as happens in these really serious situations, everyone stops talking and wants to see what you've got to say, which can be pretty disconcerting. Luckily, we hadn't taken the ship to emergency stations, which is the sort of reaction to something like this. Yeah. So I was able to, in the calmest voice I could muster, order emergency stations, and that cascades down. A whole load of things then happen. People close up, damage control teams do, but the most important thing was that it stopped everyone staring at me. Yeah. So I could now go back to the TV and go, get the engineer over and go, what is this? What's caused this, and can we stop it? He didn't know. In fact, we didn't really know what had happened for about 6 minutes. As we, I was pretty sure we hadn't hit something. We used to hit things all the time in an icebreaker. I would have felt it. So I was pretty sure it wasn't that, but I didn't know. So we've got a catastrophic situation. That much is clear. We're definitely going to lose propulsion. All the machinery's in one space. Yeah, because
as soon as water gets up to the engine, into the air tanks.
And we'd had a good go at that previously in the trip through various methods. And one time the roll reduction tank a pipe corroded and dumped that 7 tons into the space.
Right.
And that we lost a degree of propulsion then. So I knew we would lose propulsion. That much was a given. So what's caused it? Can we stop it? Was my first sort of line of questioning. Second thought is, well, what do I do with the ship whilst we've still got propulsion? Because looking at this, I reckon we've got 10 minutes max. So I go to the chart and see if there's somewhere we can anchor. I mean, there isn't. It's properly kind of Norwegian. What you see is what you get, down to 500 meters.
Yeah. So you can hit a rock, but you'll still sink.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be alongside at the same time as you hit the. It's literally sort of vertical. So there was no beach or anything to run up. Just rocks everywhere. Okay, so that option's out. I mean, of course, deliberately looking for someone to run your ship aground is a weird paradox.
Yeah,
when you've spent your entire career learning how to not do that. And now I'm looking to do it deliberately. So that option wasn't available to us. So at this point it became quite clear I needed to head into wind and just come up to 6 knots. I didn't want to go any faster than that in case this was a gash. Come up to 6 knots and just head into wind for as long as the machine.
Because that keeps the boat stable.
Keeps the head into wind, and also I knew we would stop, go beam on, and go back the other way.
Yeah.
And the other way were the rocks.
Yeah.
So buy myself as much drift time as possible because that was inevitable. So we did. We came round up to 6 knots. Engineer is starting to ask if he can shut down the engines to preserve them, and I'm like, no. I think you're not in the same headspace as me here. I no longer care about the engines.
We want it.
We need to go that way as far as we possibly can. Meanwhile, the teams are in there still. They're taking some portable pumps in there. They're running at it. They're trying to do all they can, but I mean, it's a busted flush. It's never going to work. The rate of that water coming in, even if every single pump on board was in there working at full capacity, would nowhere near. Yeah. Nowhere near. So eventually, the chief stoker, who's the guy in charge of the damage control team, says, "Right, everyone out." The ship's starting to roll. It's starting to list a bit to port.
So when you got that much water and you get the free surface effect in it,
we've got a decent free surface, and it's horrible water. I mean, it's just full of all sorts of unmentionables, and bits of metal are sort of starting to get broken off, and it's pretty dangerous. So and there's nothing they can do. Yeah. So he gets them out. The damage control officer, she's closed up and she's running the whole sort of incident at breakneck speed to try and determine with the engineer what are our options here so that they can present them to me. The helicopter's about to launch, and the other one has just taken off from Punta Arenas and is on its way back to us. Yeah. So I have to shut the one down that's on deck. I remember this very clearly. Shut it down. Don't put it in the hangar. Let's get a message to the one that's just taken off and tell them to turn back. I don't want 4.5 tons of extra top weight anytime soon. I knew that much straight away. Yeah. So turn them back and then get the flight deck crew off the flight deck. Don't waste time stowing the helicopter. Get them off the flight deck and into the ship and into the fight. Because
you're starting to get...
We're already starting, well, at this stage we're sitting a little bit low, but it's fine. It was really when we finally lost propulsion. This is when our problems really started. So the helicopter's done. The other helicopter's gone away. We know we can't shut this valve. So the engine room is now arcing. The engine is arcing spectacularly to a halt. I mean, we ran it till it physically stopped. Yeah. And there's sort of small lightning display going on in the engine room. And then we turn, and also we lose all power, because everything's in that one space. Yes. In a warship, it's all spread out.
Because this is a really big compartment with 2 engines in and your generators.
Yeah. Everything's in there. We've got a salvage generator somewhere back aft, and that's it. Everything is in there.
All your eggs in one basket. Right. And it's a big space, 1,200 cubic meters.
Yeah, 1,200 cubic meters, right. So when we go beam on, this is when the problems really start, because we've probably got 800 tons of water now in the engine room, as you say, in a free surface. The wind up there in the Magellan, I mean, you have to sort of be there. It's just relentless. 30 knots is your minimum. Yeah. Funneling down this canyon.
So I think you said you had up to 60 knots.
Yeah, I mean, it was just constant. Yeah. So we lost propulsion, and we turned, as we knew we would, beam on into this thing. Now we start rolling, and it's just the wrong periodicity. So we're really we got this free surface in the engine room. We're beam on, and we're rolling like a pig. Now our problems are actually only just beginning in some respects, because above the deck above the engine room is the main accommodation deck, and each cabin has a false bulkhead, about 18 inches of lagging, and then the ice strengthened hull, 4 inches of ice strengthened hull. And there are sweat holes. So if you're in the ice, obviously freezing outside, warm inside, condensation holes down into the engine room.
Yeah, makes it comfortable, stops water,
exactly,
rust,
pooling,
all of that
exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
The only problem was nobody on board knew that these holes existed.
Right.
Because they were, why would you? And
they were all entirely hidden.
Exactly, entirely hidden. And so as we rolled, this water was flying out of the engine room, down almost the length of both sides of the ship.
Because it rocks to one side.
It was hydrostatically forcing its way out.
Yeah.
Right. So we're now flooding down the entire length of the ship on the deck above, and no one knows where from. What's causing this? We knew the deck was a bit iffy, so we're ripping up carpets and having a look. Well, it's not that. And so now they're axing sort of the false bulkhead away. Eventually we find these holes, but there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, it's virtually the length of the ship.
Yeah.
So now we have a free surface on the deck above, and that's the width of the ship as well. So we've got
so you get even more weight from one side to the other.
The team ashore. So I'm talking to Northwood. We've managed to cobble together some iridium phones. Literally, we had about 12 of these things and about 14 batteries, and we found about 3 that kind of worked if we stood very still. And I was able to talk to Northwood, the fleet headquarters there, and the engineer was able to talk to the engineers in Abbey Wood, down in Bristol. And so we had these 2 quite tidy lines of communication leaving the ship, with this information going to and fro. And they were doing our stability. The engineers in Abbey Wood were doing our stability calculations because our system was down. Obviously, we had no power. I think we'd spun up the emergency generator at this point. I can't remember. We had some lighting, but that was about it. And they were painting a very gloomy stability picture. They were essentially saying, you're going to go into lull. You're probably going to.
Which is where you get to your sort of maximum stability, and then the ship keeps
going. Now this was, you're going to go into lull. You're probably going to capsize. You need to abandon ship. I mean, we're probably about 30 minutes in here, maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes in, perhaps. I've skipped the point where the diver went into the engine room to try and shut this valve. So
yes. So he volunteered.
Yeah, he sort of come with me. Appeared on my shoulder with one of the engineers, and they said, if he can get to this valve, he can hand crank it shut. And I was like, well, that would have been useful information 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
It turns out it was just absolute nonsense. Another really poor piece of engineering advice from the team, which in hindsight I probably should have scrutinised more, knowing what I knew of them, and it was them that got us in the situation in the first place to an extent. Anyway, so he gets dressed up into his rubber suit, and he does get in there, and he does get to this valve, but he can't hold on.
Yeah, and there's a fair amount of personal courage there.
Yeah,
he probably put himself on the line.
No question, and he gets spun off and disorientated.
Just by the force of water.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and he doesn't know his way around the engine room. He's the diver, So, but he can see the hatch in the far corner and swims for the light, almost as we're sort of shutting it down. I got a hard time for the decision to put him in there in the first place. Afterwards, fine. That was sort of hindsight stuff. But the engine room the hatch is now shut. The engine room is a metre from being full, and that's when we're at our least stable because we've now got the 2 free surfaces.
Yes. Yeah.
But there were a couple of things that sort of stuck in my mind. One was if I stopped beam on in this weather. What would I expect? And this is where the small ship time prior to back in the day in fish and in Northern Ireland and actually doing mine countermeasures as well, it was all stopped in the water. I thought I had a pretty good sense of how ships behaved when they stopped in the water. And most warships don't do that. They go from A to B at quite high speed. But I remember sitting on the bridge looking out of the window and holding on. Firstly thinking, how the hell have we ended up here? But also, what would I expect? And it never felt untoward. If we went into lull, if we got that second, I never felt it.
Yeah.
or I just knew that we were going
You
violently.
could feel how long it was sort of pausing at the limits of
Yeah, the
each
period of
roll.
speed was rapid. It was violently rapid. It was. We were going routinely 30 degrees either side of the vertical. Again, not showing off to the yacht community because I know that's not going to cut it. But I mean, for us, that's a long way, and on the bridge certainly you were a long way above the waterline.
Yeah, so 10, 12 meters.
Yeah, 12 meters. So there's a lot of transverse movement there. Of course, all I had to do was hold on and think things up. I wasn't moving large bits of timber around to do damage control.
Yeah.
So my life was relatively easy. But nevertheless, I remember looking out the window going, and then my second thought was, well, how do we abandon ship? How do we get off in these conditions? We had those lovely chutes that they put out in harbour and take a picture of, and everyone goes, oh, isn't that fun? Well, that would have been absolutely no use to us whatsoever. They would have just been torn to shreds. There's no way you're going down one of those things. With 30 degrees, at one point we went to 45 degrees. So we would have had to have deployed them, delatched them and walked them aft somehow, walk them back.
50, 60 knots of wind.
Right, I mean, even on the upper deck was not advisable. Just going outside was a bad idea because if you fall over, 1 degree water temperature, no hydraulics, we're not getting you back.
Yeah.
So that whole plan, and we did work up an abandoned ship plan, which for use later on. But that whole plan seemed to me to be fraught with risk, and I didn't feel like we were going to capsize.
Yeah.
But now that could have just been the flip of a coin. I can sit here now and go, that was the right call. I mean, and well, I suppose by definition it was, but maybe there was a little bit of luck involved there too. But yeah, we were in big trouble. Actually, of course, when the engine room pressed to the deckhead, we actually became...
So it wedges it all in,
we became more
and you've got
stable.
a solid shape where it doesn't change the stability as you roll.
We lost one of the free surfaces.
Yeah.
But by now, the deck above is catastrophic. So again...
You're properly cannibalising the vessel to sort of say...
Yeah, we're shutting hydraulic doors, we're moving... We left a lot of pumps down in the engine room space. That was a mistake. I should have seen that. I should have gone, right, get them all out. But to be honest, it wouldn't have made that much difference. But we're using what we can to try and control the flow of water now. And the port side accommodation deck fills to the deckhead quite quickly in probably the next half an hour. So I'm being told by the engineer, if you get 2 inches of water on C deck, you're going to go into lull and you're going to capsize. Yeah. And I remember looking at the camera, what I thought was the C deck camera, and it was completely black. Going, am I looking at the right camera? And looking at the camera to the right, and that had 2 inches of water. Well, that was the deck above. So we were well in excess of all these predictions already. Yeah. And so we've got a free surface on the deck above, which we're trying to break up using whatever we can find, dwarf bulkheads, classic sort of damage control techniques, axing beds out and putting them in just to stop the free surface, to break it up. And meanwhile shutting hydraulic doors and trying to regulate where the water is in the ship at any given time, which is working. It's working reasonably well. We've got a couple of other pressing issues. The engine room bulkhead is warping
because that's a huge amount of weight on the other side of it.
Noticeably bulging and creaking and panting, as we call it. So we've got to shore that up. We've got to do proper sort of wartime damage control and press that in place. Because if that gives, that 1,200 tons is now through the ship and
that's it.
Game over. Yeah. So people spent many hours in this horrible sort of very narrow compartment trying to shore that up. I mean, not fun. Whilst all this rolling's going on. There's me moaning about spilling my tea on the bridge. So we've got a few things going on at this point. I mean, not least of which is the rate at which we're heading towards the land now. We have no propulsion. I put out a mayday on channel 16. I mean, I probably should have started with this, but I put out a mayday on channel 16, the emergency channel, about 10 minutes in. Career low light, no question.
No
horrific.
Naval captain ever wants to do that. No one wants to do that.
I must have answered, I think, probably 100 maydays over my seagoing career. And on arrival, there's always an element of maritime buffoonery somewhere. Someone's done something dumb, right? Whether it's a fishing boat or whatever. And now it's me doing it. This is grim. But then even worse, no one answers. So there's no one there. So this is a come as you are party.
Yeah, this is you're on your own.
What we've got is what we've got. So that was was pretty grim. Other lowlight, the other horrible lowlight was going down to the scene of the incident. We're probably 40 minutes in now, so engine room is full, we're beam on, we're drifting towards the rocks. I go to the scene of the incident to try and get a gauge of the people down there, see what they're doing, see how they're coping. All good. In fact, one of the people who had been on the flight deck, it wasn't his job at all, but he recognised there was a vacancy there. He filled in and then spent the next 36 hours completely dominating that position. It's absolutely extraordinary to watch. But on the way up to the bridge, I dropped into the wardroom because we had the British Schools Exploration Society on board. So a bunch of 18 to 21-year-old, let's call them kids, who had come to us to learn about leadership. We'd taken them to South Georgia, we'd put them ashore, they'd done some of the part of the Shackleton Walk with their teachers, and now I had to speak to them and reassure them when I couldn't. And that was awful. You know, literally children looking terrified at me going, what's going on here? And you're like, well, you know, what do you say? I mean, so I just kind of basically did what I did all the way through, which is to not sugarcoat it. This is where we are. This is where we need to be. This is the best way I think of getting from that position to that position. You know, I don't think they were, to be fair, throughout the entire incident, they were brilliant. One of their teachers was awful and really panicked and had to be restrained at one point. So, you know, compare and contrast. The kids, on the other hand, were fantastic. But that so the Mayday on Channel 16 and then speaking to them was two career lowlights, no doubt. But yeah, so we've got a ship coming towards us, a little boat. Well, we didn't know it was little. We knew it was called the MV Poodoo. I get a call from someone saying it can only make 5 knots into the sea state, and this is in the inland waterway. It's coming from Punta Arenas down the inland waterway, and can only do 5 knots. That was the first clue that this wasn't going to be the answer to all our prayers. Sure enough, this little thing turns out with a tyre on the boarding. Little tugboat. Yeah, well, I think it was even. Well, I don't think it was even that. I think it was a fishing boat with a tyre on the front. And by now it's dark. The wind's gusting 60 knots, just continuously. What I had hoped was that they would at least take a line and yank the ship's head into wind and stop this roll. Or it was the roll that was still killing us. And we're now sitting so low in the water. We've now got nearly 2,000 tons of water on board. We're sitting so low that when it rolls, waves are breaking over the back end, the transom. And the hatch into the aft provision hold is not watertight. Not as watertight as we hoped it would be. So these waves are breaking over the back end and water is cascading into the aft hold. Well, that's game over if that floods.
Because then you've lost all of your aft buoyancy.
2 of our 3 buoyancy spaces have gone. So we have to stop that. So we've got a lot of technical work to do back aft to manage that water flow as well. So I need the ship's head into wind to stop this roll. That's what's killing us. And I'd hoped the Poodoo might do that, but they didn't. They got to about 2 miles away, said something in Spanish on the radio, and then scarpered. We never saw them again.
Like, bugger this from Game of Thrones.
I think it was Spanish for exactly that, maybe worse. It was that was annoying. But what that did, in my mind, was that then freed up the use of the forecastle. I'd kept the forecastle kind of nice and tidy, so that we could take a tow, effectively, whatever that looked like, whatever that tow ended up looking like. So now it's time to put out the anchor. A port anchor is fractionally longer. I think it was 1 cable longer. So let's put that out to its fullest extent and see if that slows us down, because we're heading towards the rocks.
As a bit of a sea anchor.
Exactly, a drogue. Let's see if it works. It didn't, but it didn't slow us down at all, disappointingly. But what it did do is it altered our angle of drift by about 7 degrees. Not much. At least it might have been that. It might actually have just been the shape of the river. It's not clear. But either way, at roughly the time we put the anchor out, our angle of drift changed by about 7 degrees. This is now taking us towards a seamount, which comes up to about 30 metres. And we are cutting across the 80 metres.
So how much cable have you got out?
12 shackles.
I've forgotten it.
It's over 100 metres.
Okay.
Perhaps you can put an edit in if I've done my maths wrong on that, but it's It's not much considering we're going across the 80-metre contour in
Yeah.
60 knots of wind.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of hours to sit there wondering if this
Yeah.
is, if this is going to work. Meanwhile, North would ring up and say, we haven't got the latest up-to-date chart. Can you tell us the name of the place you're going to run aground or you're going to hit? And we sort of look at, it's called Desolation Island, how we laughed as we reported back to Northwood and said that. There's a cruise liner that had been past us in the day, and we'd put on a little bit of a flying display for them. They've been turned around, so Northwood have got hold of their company. They've turned them around. They're now coming back down the west coast of Chile at 20 plus knots. But they're not going to get to us in time.
Yeah.
Although this little alteration of course, if we forget the seamount, actually gave us about another 45 minutes before we hit Desolation Island. And so this cruise liner was going to get to us about then.
Okay.
Pretty much. So there were options now starting to develop. None of them were good, but at least I had options. And interestingly, if you want to talk to a large type of ship who's used to hovering very close to the rocks in poor weather, the cruise industry is perfect. And that's what they do.
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt the podcast, but I wanted to share a quick message from our sponsor, His Majesty's Coast Guard. Things can quickly go wrong at sea. As we all know, the main factor in improving our safety out on the water is being prepared before setting out. It's easy to become complacent, especially if you feel you know your local waterways, coastline and vessel really well. But simple checks can help ensure trouble-free sailing for you and your crew. His Majesty's Coast Guard, the RNLI and the RYA have launched a collaboration called Reduce the Risk, Boost Your Skills. The aim is to encourage recreational boaters, that's you, to properly consider safety and preparation before heading out on the water. Refreshing your knowledge or taking a course to learn more about the principles of sailing, navigation and boat maintenance is a good place to start, as is always wearing a life jacket, carrying a means of calling for help, and briefing your crew on what should happen in an emergency. Checklists are a really helpful way of making sure nothing gets missed. Free printed boating safety checklists are available to order online and include tips and guidance for pre-season checks, radio equipment and emergency action plans. These waterproof booklets are entirely free and can be ordered on the Coast Guard's website at hmcoastguard.uk/checklist. Also remember, if you're in trouble at sea or on the coast, call the Coast Guard on VHF radio channel 16 or phone 999 and ask for the Coast Guard. Right, thanks for listening. Now back to the podcast.
So eventually, not quite at this point, but eventually I was having a good bridge-to-bridge chat with him. But we're still heading for this 18-metre contour. It's probably midnight by now. This whole thing started at 4 in the afternoon, so we're a few hours in. And cutting across the 80-metre pinnacle, we've got a handheld GPS, so we're able to put sort of lats and longs on the chart.
So there's a huge thing in here about resilience once you've lost all of your main systems, that actually these little battery-powered Inmarsat and the sat phone and a handheld GPS is exactly the kind of stuff that a sailor would carry. And you start losing your systems and you're in all sorts of trouble unless you've got backups.
And of course reversionary modes is a very warship thing. It's our bread and butter. It was just in endurance we didn't really have any, and even our EPIRB wasn't working. That was an OpDef before we sailed.
Right.
So now we're trying to cobble together aerials and get that back up and running so we can use that properly.
Yeah.
And so on and so on. But basically we're now heading towards this 80-metre contour. And then it's just a waiting game. Will the anchor hold or will it not? If it doesn't, I had sent a hit squad away to work out how we physically abandon ship. Although I made sure they never used that expression. There was only 3 of them, the ops officer plus 2. Don't say the words because someone will hear it.
As soon as you heard it.
Then it's through the ship. So don't say the words. So we had a plan to get these life rafts around to the back end and try and get people off that way. And then we were on top of this anchorage, just sort of, and it was...
So you were drifting and the anchor grabbed the seamount?
It caught the 80-metre contour of this seamount. And I wouldn't believe it.
Miraculously.
Yeah, extraordinary. Yeah. It was extraordinary. So I wouldn't believe it. And there were no visual references. It was pitch dark in the middle of nowhere. But I could just about make out the sort of the western side of the Magellan that we were tucked into. And I thought I could see their ship's head coming into wind, but I refused to believe it. It was probably about 5 minutes before I went, that's it. You know, in some form or other, we're at anchor.
It's not a secure anchorage.
Right, so I waited till we yawed to the fullest extent of port and then dropped the starboard one. Again, I was getting advice from ashore, don't drop the anchors because they'll get twisted on the tide and you won't be able to recover them. Sorry. I must have missed the memo where I care. Yeah. And it was, I mean, I'm making light of it, but at the time it was really annoying because it made clear to me that they weren't in the room. They were in a room, but it was thousands of miles away, and it wasn't this. 60 knots of wind. Firstly, who cares about the damn anchors? And secondly, what tide are we turning on? What are you talking about? Quarter of a knot? We're not going anywhere. So anyway, starboard anchor went down, and so now we're holding on, and at least this gives the cruise liner time to come to us. If the anchor hadn't held, then I would have got everyone off bar a steaming party, probably 5 or 6 of us, I think it was, and we would have waited for the cruise liner to see if they could get there first, or at least when we're on the rocks, because we would have sustained quite a lot of damage on the rocks, but we could sustain it because we were an icebreaker. Yeah. Maybe then it can do the bow to bow and hoik us off. We'll get the ship's head into wind, but let's get everyone off before we start, clattering against the rocks. But anyway, we didn't need that. We went to anchor. Now the cruise liner's there. The Chilean Navy turn up with one of their patrol ships shortly thereafter. So we're in a much, much more stable position now because we're not rolling anymore. We're still pitching. It's rough enough even in the inland waterway for the ship to be pitching quite violently at anchor, but that's not our problem anymore. That's not forcing water out of the engine room. Yeah. So the whole situation takes on a very different kind of feeling. We're not heading towards the rocks. We're not flooding at an extraordinary rate. We can now get control.
So everything's slightly stabilised at that point.
And then it's waiting for the salvage tugs to arrive, whilst trying to feed, trying to rotate people through various positions that are stressed or fatigued or cold or whatever. So managing internally the ship's company, managing myself, make sure I don't get overly fatigued. There's no point.
Because you've been on the bridge
for a while, and so anyway, eventually the first salvage tug arrived. A huge thing, and didn't speak a word of English. But this was a bit naughty. We had flown off. We had winched off the kids and their teachers, but I'd kept one of the teachers back because she spoke Spanish. So again, that was a pretty, I wasn't supposed to do that, but I just had a feeling this would come in useful. And sure enough, when the salvage tug arrived, they could talk to each other. Yeah,
makes a huge difference.
Huge difference. And it was very obvious that this was a well-run salvage tug, so well-handled salvage tug. So I was keen to pass a line, gas axe the anchors, and get going. Let's get over there.
So gas axe is just
oxyacetylene, cut through.
Cut the chains. Yeah. So let go the bitter end.
Pretty dramatic when it happened because by now.
So a naval ship doesn't have any means of sort of letting go of the anchor chains. Normally, the bitter end is attached in the anchor locker.
Right down in the bottom of the cable locker. Yeah. So I suppose we could have gone down there and tried to.
Yeah, because on a yacht you have the bitter end lashed with a rope.
Yes.
For exactly that. Yeah. So you just cut it with a knife.
So this would have been right down at the bottom of the. I mean, who I don't think necessarily it would have. And I don't know if there was any weight on it. I mean, hopefully not. But it's possible that actually the bit that had the weight on it. But either way, we had a guy with an oxyacetylene thing and just cut it off, and off it went. And then it was an interesting moment where I was being told to wait for the second salvage tug, so that they could provide redundancy, and I didn't agree. Second salvage tug wasn't coming for another 5 hours. The wind, it's now getting light again. Wind is just relentless. We've got to go beam onto the sea to get back up the Magellan, and I know that's going to cause us problems. So frankly, the sooner we can go, the better. So we take the tug. I just don't tell Northwood that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
We take the tug. We gas axe the anchors, which was spectacular. Tug takes us through the 180, and our next position, course, and speed report to Northwood is not what they're expecting. Yeah. And we've just gone, because I know that if I'd said that's what I was going to do, I'd have been told not to.
Yeah.
So again, it was the right decision under some pressure to do something slightly different from ashore. And then I think the next 24 hours was being towed. So eventually the second tug joined us, came alongside on our starboard quarter and acted as our rudder.
Yeah.
And the next 24 hours was spent in an otherwise very beautiful environment, the Patagonian Canal, heading towards Punta Arenas. And then we got alongside and kind of breathed a deep sigh of relief. And
and then tidying up started.
And then that got, that was very difficult. The next few phases, tidying up in Punta, getting the water out of the engine room took 2 weeks.
Wow.
Such was the volume and the cross-connected nature of the pipe work. So now the salvage team, the mod salvage team are on board, who were very good post-incident. Like I say, some of their advice during the incident, I could take or leave, but post-incident very good. But they had a job just to get the water out. And we're stuck in Punta Arenas, which actually in decompression terms, in trauma management terms, TRIM terms as it's now known, was quite good.
Yeah, because it gives you, you're a cohesive unit still that have all been through the same thing, and you've got time to...
We're all swapping stories, who did what, all the sort of the dit rustling, as we would call it, stealing other people's stories. It starts right from the off, but it helps. Whilst we get the ship sorted out to be towed, we think is going to be towed to the Falklands. At this point, the future of the ship's very uncertain. But we've got to get out of Chile, get to the Falklands, and then we can work out what to do from there. And in the end, clean the ship up entirely, put her on the back of one of those floating rig ships, the MV Target, and then came back on the back of that to the UK. No marching bands.
Slightly
ignominious. There were no families weeping on the jetty that day.
No.
It was grim, actually. In fact, that whole phase was really tough. We started to lose ship's company. The Navy didn't waste any time in going, right,
taking them to other platforms.
So I tried to hold on to the core people, particularly those that were likely to be investigated, the engineers. There was a handful of them who I knew were going to come under the cosh. I made sure we kept hold of the people that were likely to be affected by this. But the Falklands phase was tough. And then back in the UK, I then had a year still in command of the ship. I was now in full command of the ship because the captain got lifted and sent to another ship. Trying to manage this sort of the wreckage and what next? What are we going to repair that one? You're into heavy politics at this point. And the Navy is in full reputation control mode.
Yes, because it doesn't look great for the Navy to nearly lose a ship in the Southern Ocean.
It doesn't, and that in communications terms was complex because the ship's company wanted some recognition for what they'd done. And I was very clear on this, and I'm quite proud of the fact that before we even got alongside, I said to the ship's company, you need to reconcile the fact that not many people will care what you've done here. It's too far away, and it's too muddled with what happened before and all the stuff that led to the flood. To firewall that and then talk about what you did heroically after it is going to be very hard to do. And the Navy aren't going to be particularly interested in doing it. And that proved to be prophetic. They were not interested at all.
No, it's almost a bit of an embarrassment that they want to keep quiet.
100%. And so there was very little coverage. And the people I wrote up for some of the medallic recognition didn't make the cut. There was just a general sense of just
keep it quiet.
Which, I like to think if I was in charge of Navy comms, I might have been a bit more aggressive than that and tried to paint these two different pictures. But I can see why they didn't. And it happened over Christmas in a faraway part of the world. If this had been here, there'd have been press helicopters everywhere. You'd have no choice. We managed to do it at a time and place where we could just about keep it under wraps, and that's what happened. And then my last thing about was on the investigations. It really focused, in my view, too heavily on who did what on the day. Now I've already said the engineering work on the day was very poor, very poorly conceived, very poorly executed, poorly reported, which I'm afraid was slightly indicative of the engineering culture on board the ship. What the investigation did, in my view, was over-focus on that and back off slightly the tail. The intermediate causes, the deep causes, I talked about stressing the ship too much. The way we were configured for the 18-month deployment was not particularly well thought through. All of that was left aside. The engineering culture that was very poor was not examined, particularly in any particular depth. So in my view, the investigation was looking for someone wielding a spanner that they could hammer.
So slightly scapegoating, or not scapegoating per se, but stopping with relatively clean, easy answer rather than looking at the systemic things that
culture,
are
senior officers,
Yeah.
senior officers' decision making. You know, the admiral that said this is a good idea. Who said to him, Admiral, we're not sure it is? I can guarantee it was no one.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of complex hierarchy, breaking the chain. You know, who could have stepped in the 5 years? I mean, when the ship came out of Falmouth, its refit in Falmouth in 2005, it was not a well ship from that moment on. That refit was poor, and we had operational defects, a constant band of it. Who looked at that and went, deploying for 18 months with a light touch maintenance period in the middle is a good idea.
Yeah. I think this is, in any hierarchy, it's one of those difficult things, and the same's true on a yacht for the sort of the sailing example, where you've got a skipper who's making decisions, but the crew may have reservations about what they're doing, and it's the skipper's responsibility to take the decisions and say what they're doing. And sometimes it'll be right for them to push on and say, no, this is the right thing, and at other times the crew may have really genuine concerns based on things that really aren't right. And how do you raise that in a way that doesn't then sort of start a mutiny
trigger your career? I mean, and the Navy's its own worst enemy in some respects. Its ability to make do is its greatest combat strength. You know, our core job is to go out there, generally speaking, slightly aging, not brilliant kit. You know, that's just a reality, and make it work, and then make it work in warfare. And once you've taken damage. So we're our own worst enemy, and if you step back and go, I don't think the ship's safe to go to sea, then they'll just find someone who does. All right, cheers, thanks for your time. Let's get a new captain in. So there's this constant, as you say, it would be very easy to say, well, we should have dropped the hammer and refused to sail. But it's just never that.
Because you've got the tools you've got to, and you've got strategic objectives to deliver.
Right. Exactly right.
So I'm aware that we have probably need to be wrapping things up there. Just in terms of the lessons that for you reflecting on it, several years later now, what are the lessons that you would take from this, or feel that other people could take from it?
The one about breaking the chain I've already mentioned. That is the leader's role. Stop to spot the situation, the lemons lining up in the window of the slot machine and going, firstly being able to spot it and then intervening, because no one else will. That is definitely your job, and you have to buy yourself the thinking time to be able to do that. One of the key things, lessons for me from this incident, actually it wasn't even a lesson in this incident, because it's taught at day one, is if you're in charge and you're on your knees tying a rope in the leadership exercise, you'll fail. Because you're now not looking at...
You can't see the big picture.
So I had to trust the teams around me, who were all very competent, and the damage control team, there were definitely occasions where I heard things that I wasn't sure about, or on a couple of occasions didn't even agree with, but I couldn't, the minute I got sucked in there, I'd never get out. So let the teams run their business, but know when to intervene.
And this thing about the chain I think is really interesting, because whenever you look at any kind of maritime incident, or whatever the vessel is, something significant goes wrong, and you can always say, well, there was a poor decision here and a check that wasn't done here, so the mousing on the shackle wasn't done up properly, so the pin came out of the shackle, and then the sail fell down, and the rope went around the propeller, and then we lost propulsion, and then somebody went overboard, and all of a sudden you're dealing with a fatality. But at some point you can see a chain of events leading to a significant incident, and it's a leadership responsibility to spot those chains and intervene, I guess.
I categorise it in three. You get the deep causes. This is actually, Joseph Nye talks about the conditions to go to war, but it's the same for an incident. Deep, intermediate, and precipitating. Precipitating is the one that everyone zooms in on. But the intermediate causes, the 18-month deployment, and the culture and the engineering culture versus the deep, the misuse, the abuse of the ship. I count, I think, probably 7 kind of key instances in the run up to this where intervention could have been more rigorous. I'm not saying it could have stopped it or should have stopped it, but it could have been more rigorous, but we just sort of bluffed our way past it. And
so in a sailing example, that's a yacht that's had slightly poor winter maintenance. It's not necessarily had all of the careful checks done, and then there's a voyage planned where you end up going to sea in slightly more onerous conditions than perhaps you should have done, and then
Exactly.
somebody falls over
Yeah.
and injures themselves, and then
Yeah.
you've got the precipitating.
It's exactly the same. And I mean, the principles, as you said right at the start, big ship, small ship, doesn't matter. The principles are identical. And I would say the one thing the Navy does well is it drills a lot of this badness out of you. But just by practicing and practicing and practicing, whether it's damage control, man overboard, fire, flood. Machinery breakdowns. We do that every single day. And again, talking to the super yacht community, they don't. But if you don't do that, you're running the risk of the more you can make automated, the better.
Yeah.
The more the training kicked in. That's a cliche for a reason. But this is where the military is very good. I'm not saying we excel in many areas, and in leadership, not at all. But you make a machine that has muscle memory, so that the captain can go and it doesn't really matter. Someone else just steps in, and so the more you pre-program these incidents whether that's in a yacht or a sail training, whatever, the less you have to rely on thinking power.
Yes,
when the real one happens.
You're not going to have a lot of brain space.
Yeah,
left.
exactly. Again, back to buying yourself the thinking space to make the key decisions. If you're going into the technical, and the Navy is very good at removing that by repetition. So again, if that's a valuable lesson to people in smaller boats, then I hope it is, because you can't drill these things too often.
No, and I was also struck by your sort of concurrent activity thing of getting everyone to emergency stations, and actually, as soon as you've done that, nerves start to calm. People have got something to do, and giving them a job and a responsibility and something that they know what they're meant to be doing, rather than sitting there waiting and panicking.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
It literally, emergency stations, everyone has a place and they just go to it and do their job. This is, again, back to my point about sort of not quite brainwashing, but pre-programming a set of responses, that all of which lend themselves to being able to sustain yourself under extraordinary duress, which is essentially what we ended up having to do.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, there's a huge amount to think about there. It's an incredible story. I'm very glad that you made it through, that you were on board, that you got the ship there, and that it all came together. And yeah, thank you for sharing that story with me. That's really inspiring and challenging to listen to.
Cheers.
Well, guys, that's all we've got time for now. If you enjoyed that, give it a thumbs up and a like and a share and all of that good stuff. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time on the Sailing Podcast.
Thanks to our sponsor, His Majesty's Coast Guard, for supporting this episode of the Sailing Podcast.